Mahoney had called me in, hoping I might have an idea to bail him out. And, of course, misery loves company, especially on a sunny afternoon when everybody wants to be anywhere but in the middle of a potential shoot-'em-up where people would probably die. The first situation briefing took place in a nearby grade school auditorium. It was jam-packed with Washington police personnel, but also FBI agents, including key members from the hostage rescue team. HRT was ready to roll if it came to that, and it looked like it might happen soon. Near the end of the briefing, Captain Tim Moran, the head of SWAT for the Metro Police, restated the facts as he knew them. He had to be in a highly emotional state, for obvious reasons, but he appeared calm and in control. I knew Moran from my years on the force and respected his courage. Even more, I respected his integrity, and never more than I did that afternoon, when he might have to go against his own men. To sum up the situation, the target is a 4-story building where black tar heroin was being turned into powder and a lot of cash. We have at least a dozen drug lab workers inside, mostly women. We have the lab's guards, well armed and on at least 3 floors. Looks like about a dozen of them, too. And we have 6 SWAT members who attempted a robbery and got trapped inside. They apparently have a quantity of the heroin and cash in their possession. They're pinned down between drug dealers and other personnel on the top floors, and about a half a dozen more armed guards who showed up while the robbery was in progress. At this point, we're in a Mexican standoff. We've made initial contact with both sides. Nobody wants to give in. I guess they figure, what do they have to lose or gain? So they're just sitting tight. Tim Moran continued in a calm voice. Because there are members of SWAT inside, given the complications of it, the hostage rescue team will take the lead here. Metro will give our full cooperation to the FBI. Captain Moran's summation was clear and concise, and it had taken some guts to hand the operation over to the FBI. But it was the right thing to do if somebody had to go inside and possibly fire on the SWAT guys. Even if they were bad cops, they were still cops. It didn't sit well with any of us to have to shoot at our brothers. Ned Mahoney leaned in close to me. Now what do we do, Einstein? HRT is caught in the middle of a shit sandwich. See why I wanted you here? Yeah, well, excuse me if I don't fall all over myself thanking you. You're welcome anyway, said Mahoney, and he punched my arm in a bullshit gesture of camaraderie that made us both laugh. Chapter 23.
It was in his blood. The butcher was in the habit of monitoring Metro police communications whenever he was in D.C., and it was hard to miss this baby. What a royal clusterfuck, he couldn't help thinking to himself. SWAT against hostage rescue. He loved it. For the last few years he'd been cutting back on the kinds of jobs he did. Working less, charging more. 3 or 4 major hits a year, plus a few favors for the bosses. That was more than enough to pay the bills. Besides, the new Don, Magione Jr., wasn't exactly a fan of his. The only real problem was that he missed the thrills, the adrenaline punch, the constant action. So here he was, at the policeman's ball. He was laughing as he parked his Range Rover a dozen blocks from the potential firefight scene. Yes, indeedy, the neighborhood was sure jumping. Even on foot he couldn't get much closer than several blocks away on Kentucky Avenue. On his walk toward the crime scene, he'd already counted more than 24 Metro D.C. Police Department buses parked on the street, plus dozens more squad cars. Then he saw blue FBI windbreakers, probably the hostage rescue boys up here from Quantico. Damn, they were supposed to be hot shits, right up there with the best in the world. Just like him. This was good stuff. And he wouldn't miss it for anything, even if it was a little dangerous for him to be here. He spotted several command post vehicles next, and at the frozen zone, or inner perimeter, he thought he picked out the incident commander. Then Michael Sullivan saw something that gave him pause and made his heart race a little. A dude in street clothes talking to one of the FBI agents. Sullivan knew this guy, the one in civvies. His name was Alex Cross, and, well, he and Sullivan had something of a history. And then he remembered something else. Marianne. One of his favorite kills. And photographs. This was getting better and better by the minute.
Chapter 24. I could definitely see why Ned Mahoney wanted me here. A heroin factory estimated to have more than 150 kilos of poison, street value at $7 million. Cops versus cops. It looked like a no-win situation for everybody involved. I heard Captain Moran say, "I'd tell you to go to hell, but I work there, and I don't want to see you every day." That sort of summed things up. No one inside was showing signs of surrendering. Not the drug dealers, not the guys from SWAT. They also weren't allowing any of the lab workers trapped on the 4th floor to leave. We had the names and approximate ages for some of the lab workers, and most of them were women, between 15 and 81. They were neighborhood people who couldn't find other jobs, usually because of language and education barriers, but who needed and wanted to work. I wasn't doing a whole lot better than anybody else at figuring out a possible solution or an alternative plan. Maybe that was why I decided to take a walk outside the barricades at around 10. Try to clear my head. Maybe an idea would come if I physically put myself outside the box. By now there were hundreds of spectators, including dozens of reporters and TV camera crews. I strolled a few blocks along M Street, my hands dug deep into my pockets. I came to a crowded street corner where people from the neighborhood were being interviewed for TV. I was starting to walk by, lost in my thoughts, when I heard one of the women talking between wrenching sobs. "That my flesh and blood trapped inside. Nobody care. Nobody give a damn." I stopped to listen to the interview. The woman couldn't have been more than 20, and she was pregnant. From the look of her, she was due any day. Maybe tonight. "My grandma's 75. She inside to make money so my kids can go to Catholic school. Her name Rosario. She a beautiful lady. My grandma don't deserve to die." I listened to a few more emotional interviews, mostly with family members of the lab workers, but also a couple with the wives and kids of the drug crew trapped inside. One of the runners in there was just 12 years old. Finally, I headed back inside the barricades, the inner perimeter, and I went looking for Ned Mahoney. I found him with some administrative types, suits, and Captain Moran outside one of the command post vans. They were discussing shutting off the building's power. "I've got an idea," I told him. "Well, it's about time." Chapter 25.
The butcher was still hanging around the police barricades in Washington, and he knew he shouldn't be there. He was supposed to be home in Maryland hours ago, but this was worth it. The craziness of it all. He wandered through the crowd of looky-loos, and he was feeling like a kid let loose at a state fair, or at least what he thought a kid at a state fair would feel like. Hell, they even had ice cream and hot dog vendors at the scene. People's eyes glistened with excitement. They wanted to see some real-life action. Well, hell, so did he. So did he. He definitely was a crime scene junkie, and he thought it stemmed from the days spent with his old man in Brooklyn. When he was little, his father used to take him on fire and police calls that he intercepted on his two-way. It was about the only good thing he ever did with the old man, and he figured it was because his father thought he'd look like less of a freak if he dragged a kid along beside him. But his father was a freak. He liked to see dead bodies, any kind, on a slab of pavement, inside a crashed car, being hauled out of a smoldering building. His crazy old man was the original butcher of Sligo, and much, much worse. Of course, he was the butcher now, one of the most feared and sought-after assassins in the world. He was the man, wasn't he? He could do whatever he wanted to, And that's what he was up to now. Michael Sullivan was pulled out of his reverie by the sound of somebody talking into a mic at the hostage scene. He looked up, and it was the detective again, Alex Cross. It almost seemed like fate to him, like ghosts calling to the butcher from the past.
Chapter 26. I figured my idea was a long shot, and definitely out of left field, but it was worth it if it could save some lives. Plus, nobody had come up with anything better. So at midnight, we set up microphones behind a solid row of police cars and transport buses parked on the far side of 15th. It looked impressive, if nothing else, and the TV cameras were all over it, of course. For the next hour, I led family members up to tell their stories into the mics, to reason and plead with the men inside to put down their weapons and leave the building, or at the very least, to let the lab workers out. The speakers stressed that it was hopeless not to surrender, and that many of those inside would die if they didn't. Some of the stories told at the mics were heartbreaking, and I watched spectators tear up as they listened. The best of the moments were anecdotes. A Sunday soccer game a father was supposed to referee, a wedding less than a week away, a pregnant girl who was supposed to be on bed rest but who came to plead with her drug-runner boyfriend. Both of them were 18. Then we got an answer from inside. It came while a 12-year-old girl was talking about her father, one of the dealers. Gunshots erupted in the building. The gunfire lasted for about 5 minutes, then stopped. We had no way of telling what had happened. We knew only one thing. The words of their loved ones had failed to move the men inside. No one had come out. No one had surrendered. "It's all right, Alex." Ned took me aside. "Maybe it bought us a little more time." But that wasn't the result either of us was looking for. Not even close. At 1:30, Captain Moran turned off the mics outside. It looked like nobody was coming out. They had made their decision. A little after 2 o'clock, it was decided by the higher-ups that the FBI's hostage rescue team would go into the building first. They would be followed by a wave of D.C. police, but no one from SWAT. It was a tough-minded decision, but that's the way it was these days in Washington. Maybe because of the terrorist activity over the past few years. People didn't seem to want to try to negotiate their way out of crisis situations anymore. I wasn't sure which side of the argument I was on, but I understood both. Ned Mahoney and I would be part of the first assault team to go inside. We were assembled out on 14th Street, directly behind the building under siege. Most of our guys were pacing, restless, talking among themselves, trying to stay focused. "This is a bad one," Ned said. "SWAT guys know how we think. Probably even that we're coming in tonight." "You know any of them? The SWAT team inside?" I asked. Ned shook his head. "We don't usually get invited to the same parties." Chapter 27. We dressed up in dark flight suits with full armor, and both Ned and I had MP5s. You could never predict too much about a night assault, but especially this one, with SWAT types on the inside and HRT as the force coming to get them. Ned got a message on his headset, and he turned to me. "Here we go, Alex. Keep your head down, buddy. These guys are as good as we are. You do the same." But then the unexpected happened, and this time it wasn't such a bad thing. The front door of the building opened. For a few seconds there was no activity at the door. What was going on in there? Then an elderly woman dressed in a lab smock wandered out into the bright lights aimed at the building. She held her hands up high and kept saying, "Don't shoot me!" She was followed by more women in lab coats, young and old, as well as 2 boys who looked to be 12 or 13 at the most. People behind the barricades were screaming out names. They were weeping for joy, clapping wildly. Then the front door slammed shut again. The exodus was over. Chapter 28. The release of 11 lab workers stopped the full hostage rescue team assault and opened up communications again. The police commissioner and the chief of detectives appeared on the scene and talked with Captain Moran. So did a couple of ministers from the community. Late as it was, the TV crews were still here